to the intentions of the overall project, and then to the volume, The Influence of Religion on Character Development, Ethical Education, and the Communication of Values in Late Modern Pluralistic Societies. Our project aims to better understand the circulation of powers and the value hierarchies in late modern pluralistic societies around the world. Many people today have difficulty appreciating and valuing the makeup of pluralistic societies. They do not adequately perceive the essential characteristic of pluralistic societies, namely their complex separation of powers. When they hear the keyword pluralistic society, they then tend to assume mere plurality of individuals and individual attitudes to life and a diversity of human groups and associations. Liberal-minded people then welcome the freedom inherent in this open plurality and its colorful opportunities for development. More conservative-minded people, and of course the numerous opponents of all forms of pluralism, fear that it provides a breeding ground for social and ethical instability. The resulting fear of disorientation and relativism goes hand in hand with today's much lamented democratic fatigue or even hostility towards democracy. For some years now, we have been concerned to see various countries moving from liberal political and social conditions to autocratic or even dictatorial forms of political government, perhaps motivated in part by this distrust to pluralism. What do we mean by the complex separation of powers in pluralistic societies? It is characterized by the fact that 10 or so supporting systems work together for the well-being of our society, but these systems also are partly in competition with each other. We call these systems social systems or speak of the multi-systemic nature of pluralistic societies. These systems are, in our view, the market, the media, family and education, religion, law, science, politics, healthcare, and the military. In the initial planning phase of the project, we wanted to emphasize the multi-systemic makeup of pluralistic societies over the elusive plurality of individuals. However, the increasing autocratic developments around the world have shifted our perspective. This is because the social and cultural plurality in civil societies, in the media, in educational institutions and religious organizations, a plurality which, as I said, we initially viewed rather critically, must be more strongly taken into account, especially in the face of developments that notoriously hinder the enjoyment of freedom and the search for truth. So I think these are sure signals that in these countries who turn away from truth and freedom appreciating conditions, you see the upcoming dangers. The volume on the influence of religion on character development, ethical education, and the transmission of values in late modern pluralistic societies, which I now present, can illustrate the challenge that arises for pluralistic societies through their characterization as both multi-systemic and individually plural. In February 1968, the New York Times published a gloomy prediction by the renowned American sociologist Peter Berger. It read, "Religions are in inexorable decline worldwide. In the 21st century, they would probably only be found in small sects that would have to unite in order to resist a global secular culture." 30 years later, around the turn of the century, Berger had to admit that this prediction had proved to be completely wrong. Already by 1970, international statistics on people's religious affiliation, strong and weak, but religious affiliation anyway, showed that 80% of people worldwide profess some form of religion or related to some form of religion. By 2000, international statistics saw 87%. the trend was towards a remarkable further increase in religious affiliation. However, this trend does not apply today to the liberal, economically and scientifically influential societies in Northern Europe, North America, and Australia. Even in the once particularly dynamic religious environments of South Africa and South Korea, developments are stagnating. Both in families and in organized religious and educational systems, the influence and effectiveness of religion is declining. Evident religious stability, on the other hand, was and is often associated with monohierarchical, patriarchal, and gerontocratic political and religious forms. A tension exists between liberal, theologically emptied and trivialized religiosity in secularized environments and self-secularizing educational and religious communities, on the one hand, and stable authoritarian religious mentalities and institutions in autocratic or increasingly dictatorial political environments on the other. But recognizing this tension provides an inadequate picture of the global situation. It ignores the largest devotional movement of the 20th and early 21st centuries, which today has 650 million members, almost a third of the 2 billion Christians worldwide. These are the Pentecostal churches and charismatic movements, which have in common that they focus on God and God's Spirit, and the religiosity seized and shaped by this Spirit. This Spirit is far more than the thoughts and feelings of the human spirit, as impressive as it is, with its possibility of reaching out to the remote past and the distant future and connecting with fellow human beings. Nor is the divine spirit merely a cloudy, numinous entity, a vague beyond, an undefined transcendence, as difficult as the divine often seems to be to grasp. In Hebrew and Greek, the word spirit, ruach pneuma, also stands for wind. This is probably the origin of many vague concepts of the spirit, which have discredited religion in their windy nebulousness. The Spirit of God is neither merely windy, nor does it constitute an isolated, self-assured individual who then enters into all kinds of relationships. Rather, the Spirit constitutes a network of community in which people enter into lively, differentiated individual relationships and social relationships. From the very beginning, this network or community constitutes complex relationships in which many people, events, and impulses interact emergently. This polyphonic relationship of influence on one another are worked by the Spirit. The Spirit of God, these are the good powers about Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote so impressively. Wonderfully sheltered by good powers, we confidently await whatever may come. God is with us in the evening and in the morning, and certainly on every new day. So this text, written in prison and shortly before his being murdered, captures the hearts and minds of many people, not only in Germany. They want this text for baptism, for confirmation, for wedding, for funeral. So obviously the impressive notion of von guten Mächten wunderbar geborgen, kept by good powers, is convincing for many people. But what are the good powers? According to biblical and theological orientation, the good powers are the powers of the divine spirit, namely the unconditionally good spirit of justice, of freedom, of truth, of human kindness and peace. And these dimensions of the spirit not merely individually, but in their interaction. They are a powerhouse of good. Nor is the spirit just an intellectual force. It is a multifaceted, practical, and material energy that has strong religious effect, but is not limited to religion alone. The tremendous growth power of religiosity lies, in my view, in the orientation toward the Spirit of God and its polyphonic radiance. We therefore must correct our binary, either-or thinking. This binary or twin poles thinking is helpful for quick understanding. I and thou, God and the human being, God and world, right and left, up and down, etc., etc., etc. But this is not sufficient for orientation in complex political, social, cultural, and religious contexts. The powerful religious piety movements are oriented toward the basic figure of the outpouring of the Spirit, of which the Old Testament prophets and the New Testament traditions already say, the Spirit of God is poured out on men and women in patriarchal environments. It is poured out on old and young people, and this in gerontocratic environments in which only the old are in charge. It is poured out on servants and handmaids, and this in slave-owning societies, which were a matter of course in the ancient world. The enthusiasm for the outpouring of the Spirit and the imparting of good powers and gifts to various people is formative for the strong religious developments of the 20th and 21st centuries, such as the Pentecostal movements or religions that are affiliated or impressed by these mindsets. The decisive contrast between these movements and the eroding religious forms of liberal religiosity in the West lies in the criticism of abstract, empty, and untrustworthy concepts of God on the one hand, and on the other hand, a concentration on God and God's Spirit, and thus the realistic forces of justice, freedom, truth, human kindness, peace, which carry, save, judge, uplift, and elevate people. And this in a world that is, unfortunately, also doomed by forces of injustice, lack of freedom, untruth, inhumanity, and the absence of peace. The volume on our project on religion deals not only with these impulses of a creative and dynamic religiosity, but also with several critical perspectives on it. A North American theologian emphasized the great importance of open dialogical and sociable communication in everyday life, in contrast to the pluralistic multisystemic divisions of powers and its formative influence on character development, ethical education, and the communication of values. This was already, thank you, Jennifer, in the beginning of our project, where we still were very high on the multisystemic structured powers, organized forms of pluralism. And here we already got the first signals in the beginning of our project. Don't underestimate the soft powers, the emergent powers of personal communication, and so on and so on. So this was a helpful critique. It's precisely in the midst of the diffuse expectations of multicultural, multi-religious environments and pluralistic societies that the preserving forces of ethno-cultural affiliation become so important. These forces of preservation must prove themselves in the tension between patriarchal and autocratic forms on the one hand, and on the other, the demand for active participation of women in public life and in democratic cosmopolitan values. Here we were very much helped by the knowledge of a law colleague, a lawyer with knowledge of Islam, and she warned against underestimating the importance of family ties in Islam and the efforts to pass on traditional values to future generations. So we were very high on Max Weber and Luhmann and Parsons and all these multisystemic thinkers, and then we got these warnings, different kind of warnings. Also a Jewish colleague recommended a renewed focus on the thinking of Martin Buber, with a personalistic or dialogical approach of concentrating on the interpersonal relationship with God, and he argues that all religiosity must ultimately pass through this I-thou concentration. So we had in our volume also strong opponents against our critique of binary thinking. The Asian contributions from China and Korea also shed light on the tensions between the cultural and normative weight of more than 2,000 years old traditions of education within the framework of the Confucian-influenced family and a contemporary Christian religious cosmopolitanism that is open to pluralism. So many interesting tensions in this volume. One contribution warns against religiously influenced gestures of outdoing oneself and recommends an ethos of passivity and sacrificial passion. This is contradicted by diaconal contributions and contributions characterized by a dialogue between religion and law. They emphasize the connection between justice and the protection of the disadvantaged that is central to religion, law, and ethics. This connection between religiosity, gaining political loyalty, and developing a sustainable ethos and a humane legal culture is nothing new. It has spanned epochs. It can be documented as far back as Mesopotamia around 3200 BC. Here we have these. I gave peace to the city of Lagash because I took care of the widows and the orphans. And we thought about this, and we thought, well, it's nice to care for the widows and the orphans, but why does this guy bring peace to the city? Well, because he also convinced the healthy, mature, and well-situated males in the country. So it was this ethos that we then highlighted a lot in religious traditions, has also a very strong political power. So much on the volume on religion. The contributions in the other 9 volumes on the other individual social systems take up the findings of these fruitful interdependencies in a variety of ways. Thank you very much.